Thank you very much, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone. Hopefully, it will be a very insightful session and then very engaging. So, we'll need everyone to come on board. So, budget is nothing technical, it's not only for the finance people, it's what we do every day on a day to day basis. So, it can be something you consciously do, like sitting down and writing your income versus your expenditure for the month, or unconscious, like just having in mind, I have this money, what am I going to do? Then in your mind, you just think about what you're going to do. That's budgeting. So it's not something we have to leave to only the finance people to do, but it's something that we all need to come on board to understand so that the process will be as effective as possible. So we'll first want to just do a quick definition of what budgeting is, looking at the key areas. So budget is basically a financial plan for a defined period, which is very key, and it's not normally within a year. And the main aim to greatly enhance the success of any financial undertaking. And in simple terms, it's just the amount you are going to raise and spend as an organization over a given period of time. So the key words here is what you are going to raise and what you are going to spend. And then time is also a factor. So what is the budgeting process all about? So before you start even to think about your budget for a year, as an organization, as an enterprise, or for a project, a specific project you are going to undertake, there are some specific questions you have to ask yourself as a team, not as an individual, let me put it. So as I was saying, this is something that we all need to come on board as a team. So you don't need the finance people to just work on the budget, or we leave to the managers of the various departments to work on it, or only for the CEO to do it. It's something that we all need to come around as a team and then discuss. So these are some of the questions you need to start looking at or thinking about before you even start to draw your budget. So you first ask yourself, what are the objectives of the project? So if you want to undertake a project, you have to first decide, what are we trying to achieve? What do we want to do? If it's a proposal we are sending to a donor, what is the donor looking at? Chioma was mentioned the fact that you have to look at the thematic areas of the donor themselves, because every call the donor will give out, it will be specific about the thematic areas they are looking forward to funding at this particular project. So you look at all these things and you decide whether we are going to look at it or not. And then as an organization or as an enterprise, you also have to look at, for a year, what are we trying to do this year? If there is no strategic plan, then it means every year you have to sit down to think about what we need to do this year. So once the objective is clear, then you ask yourself, what are the activities we need to undertake for us to achieve these set targets or goals or objectives? Then you try to list them down. And then the big question is, what resources do we need to carry out the activities? And that's where the funding comes in. And then the next question you ask yourself is, where are we going to get this fund from? And then once you start deliberating on these things, the final question is, are what we are looking at very realistic? Are we going to get realistic results? So these are the questions you need to ask yourself just before you start the budgeting process. So briefly, this is how the budgeting process is. So you first start by planning and your preparation. So ideally, and the best practice is that you work on your budget when you have your work plan. So you have the work plan of the business, of the enterprise, of the organization that you want to achieve within the year. So within the year, this is what you are going to do. So that's more or less like the budget in words. So there is no money attached to it. This is what you want to do. You have your plan. And then you prepare towards it. So by preparation, ideally, all the departments, all work streams need to meet and then plan. And so we know what you are going to do as this department, as a finance department, as admin, as HR. These are the things you want to do. And then after you've put all these things together, you have to let it be approved. So depending on where you work, if there is a board, the board needs to approve the budget. If there is management that needs to approve it, management needs to approve it. Approval is important because it adds sort of power to the the budget you have. So it means everyone is aware of it. Management knows what you are going to do. And so when there is questions, we know who to answer before the actual implementation starts. So ideally, the plan and the preparation should be done prior year before the year you are in, just to make sure that once you start a fresh year, you know where you are going so that there is no lag. So that's when you start the implementation. So the implementation ideally should start from January if you are looking at the whole organization or the whole enterprise. So January is when we start implementation. And then monitoring comes in. So monitoring also shouldn't be left to the finance people alone. Let me start with approval. And by approval, I said the board, management, or AGM, if there is an AGM, and then they have to sit down to approve what you have put in place for the year. And then implementation starts. So ideally, like I said, implementation should start in January. That's for the new year. If it's a specific donor project, implementation starts based on the agreement you signed with your donor. So the timelines are clear, and then that's when the implementation starts. And then monitoring follows. And monitoring, as I mentioned, shouldn't be left with the finance department. It's something the whole organization, every department should be keen on following. So you are monitoring what you plan to do. How am I doing? But for the finance department in particular, your key aim is to ensure that at least quarterly you brief the whole organization by department by sending in them the actual versus the budgeted so that they all know. And then for the next 6 months, ideally within the 6 months, you should sit down to review. And that's the final phase where you sit down to review on what you said you were going to do, what have been done. And then as a team, you also move into meetings where you discuss how you are going to buffer. If it's about your income, how are you going to ensure that you are meeting the income target? And expenditure, where we are underspending, we need to discuss how we are going to make it. If we are underspending, what happens if you are overspending? So all those things come into place within the next 6 months. Then after the year two, we also do the same review process, and that was going to feed into our next phase of the planning process. So it's a cycle that we move around at every time. So okay, so the next section we'll be looking at is the method of budget preparation. So how then do you prepare your budget? So methods you can use, but for the purpose of this session, we'll be looking at 3 methods. The first one being the incremental. And with the incremental, you look at what happened last year, that's for the whole organization. Or if it's a budget, a specific project, you look at if you've carried out it in the past, what did we do? How did we do it? At this stage, you would already have your actuals. So that is, the incremental is only used when it's something you've done for in the past. So if it's a new area, incremental is not something we want to look at. So if you've done it in the past, you have your actual, and then you sit down. So based on inflation and some factors, you look at either adding or subtracting based on what you already have to the budget that you had last year or for the last project. And I want to also reiterate the fact that it is not appropriate to use it if the things have changed, have significantly changed. So if what you did last year have changed a lot. So if you were going into villages to your converging meetings, because of COVID, you can't do it now. And so you can't use that same budget this year. And so you need to make changes. Activity-based budget is used for new areas. And so you want to ask the various departments, the budget they presented, why do we need to add this? Why do we need to include this? And then they are supposed to justify everything that they've brought on board. And so the question of how you would know whether the cost to use, at this stage, the departments have the task to ensure that what they are putting there is realistic. And so if it means going to the market to ask questions, going to hotels to ask for prices, everything you need to do to ensure that what I'm putting there is realistic, knowing that if I'm unable to justify what I've placed there, it will not be accepted in the budget for the period, then that's the task you need to do. And then the zero-based budget it's quite similar to the activity base. So zero-based budget, to you are starting from zero. You don't know anything. You don't have anything in mind. And so with that in mind, you have to ensure that you do all the necessary research, and those for entirely new projects, something you've never done before. So that means if you have to get experts to come and explain, definitely some way, somehow, someone would have done something similar in the past. So even if you have to go to almighty Google to ask to look for organizations or enterprises who have done something in this area, then you use it. And then you contact them. Social media is there. Let's make use of all those. Contact them, speak to them, and get all the information. We are looking at realistic budgets because you don't want to draw a budget for a donor to say no. And so you have to ensure that everything you have put there is very realistic. So this is just a sample of what you need for budget preparation. So for income sources, you are looking at your sales or revenue if you are in to make profit. For donor funds, at the time of preparation, some of the donors may have confirmed your budget, and so you want to use it for your, even if it's not been unconfirmed, at this stage you need it just to make sure that your budget is accurate. And then where there is membership dues and contributions, you add it. And then the earned income. So if you are into speaking engagements, if you are training people, you receive fees for that, all those should be added to your income. For expenditure, for staff costs is very key. Please, let's not assume. Donors know you have to work with people. And so let's not assume that they will not pay for staff costs. They will not pay for administrative costs, unless they've specifically said it. But please ensure that every cost you need to put in your budget for it to be approved, for your work to be effective, please let's put it in. Let's not assume, please. Unless the donor has said it, please not assume. So all the staff-related costs, their social security, the allowances you have to pay them, all those should be factored into the expenditure for staff costs. If you are into production, all the costs you need should be. So for project-specific costs, if you need consultancy, so if you hire a consultant to be able for you to put together a project, you include the fees in the budget because they also contributed to it. If you'll be organizing conferences, the per diems you'll be paying out, the conference fees, accommodation, feeding, all those should be factored in. And then the administrative costs. So for some donors, they would give you a limit. So the organization I work with, African Women's Development Fund, we give about 15% for administrative costs, excluding the staff costs, excluding audit costs. And so it's clear from inception, so you know. And so when we get to the grants budgeting stuff, we will talk about that. But it's ideal you put every cost that you think you should put in for the project or the work to be carried out effectively. And then some costs we tend to forget when we are budgeting. And so core costs like insurance, like utilities, like bank charges, we tend to forget them in our budgeting. And then staff-related costs. If you have to recruit people, it would involve costs. If you have to train them, it will involve costs. The benefits of these staff, the taxes, all these should be factored in. The maintenance costs should be factored in. Where you have board and they have to meet, where there is an AGM, these are costs we normally tend to forget. And then we are in the middle of the year and we are like, so what happens? The donor has already approved our budget. So what happens to these costs? And then we find ourselves struggling. So please, let's take care of these costs. Audit is very key. Once you have audited accounts, the donor is assured that this is a very credible organization, and so they need to be funded because the audited reports are there. Equipment costs should be funded, should be looked at. If you have to raise funds, all the fundraising costs should be factored, and that includes the consultant who helped you in drawing up the budget. And then finally, when you are completing a grant-specific budget, these are the things you have to look at. So you are requesting for a grant for a donor. First, you have to look at if there is a template for the budget. If it's not provided, you ask the donor. If he says there is none, then you are at liberty to work on your own budget template. And then where the template is provided, ensure that you read and understand the template, and the requirements for completing it. So it will normally be provided. How you need to fill the template and everything will be provided. And then when you put in the figures, there is a need to explain. So staff salary, you put 200 there, but you are paying salaries of 500. Then you have to put in that for this particular salary, this budget is for just 20% of the salary. So it's clear from inception. And then if the template is already given to you and it's an Excel sheet, please ensure that in your Excel sheet, the calculation option is always on automatic. I'll demonstrate that shortly. Because where the templates are locked, you're unable to feed in. And if it's not on automatic and it's on manual, you're unable to get the calculations to tally at the end of the day. And then you have to also ensure that the totals reflect the amount you are requesting. So you normally do a narrative or a proposal and then the budget. So the proposal, what amount you are requesting in the proposal should be the same amount as what is in the budget. There should never be a conflict. And then look out for ineligible expenses. So where the donor will come out that these expenses shouldn't come in the budget, kindly ensure that they don't reflect in the budget. And then finally, ensure that every aspect of the budget is completed before you send it to the donor. And ideally, all those who are going to be involved in the project should be able to have a look at the budget and then ensure that we all agree before the budget is taken out.